When Wi-Fi was new, it was pretty difficult to set up. The forums were filled with frustrated people trying to figure out how to get their Wi-Fi devices to connect and stay connected. Wireless router manufacturers responded to this by making wireless routers easier and easier to set up. Nowadays, you can literally take a wireless router out of the box, plug it in, type in the SSID and password, and you have a Wi-Fi connection. Not much of a Wi-Fi connection, but still a Wi-Fi connection. The only problem with this is, if later you want to do something more interesting with your home network than surf and read emails, you may not have a clue where to begin. This video will cover all the major settings on your wireless router and give you a strong familiarity with it and how it works, so later you'll be able to do more advanced configurations with confidence. This is the video complement to Chapter 3 of the Home IT Handbook, which you can download for free at wifi-guy.net, the site that helps you go from computer novice to home IT pro. In this video, we're going to cover getting your wireless router to a baseline setup, including setting up the admin password, getting it connected to the internet, setting up your Wi-Fi passphrases, setting up a DHCP scope, configuring quality of service, updating your firmware, and backing up your wireless configuration. Before we get started, let's get familiar with some of the ports on the back of the wireless router. Of course, you're going to have the port for the AC power outlet. You're going to have an on-off switch. Some routers that support WPS will have a button so you can connect other devices to your wireless router using WPS. If something goes wrong with the router or your configuration and you want to start all over again, you can always use the reset button. It'll either be a button or it'll be a little hole you can stick a pin in. Some wireless routers give you the option to turn the Wi-Fi on or off. Just about all wireless routers will have at least one USB port to plug in printers and external hard drives. The ports that are all grouped together are going to be your LAN ports, meaning your local area network ports. These are the ports that you use to connect your local network devices to. Now, this is a DSL router which connects to a DSL modem, which is why it says ADSL. If it connects to a broadband modem, this will be an Ethernet port and it'll say WAN on it. To configure the wireless router, of course, we have to connect to it somehow. Wireless routers offer a multitude of ways to connect to it to do the initial configuration. You can usually connect using Wi-Fi, an Ethernet cable, and some wireless routers will provide a barcode you can use to do the initial configuration with your smartphone. Instead of getting all caught up in multiple proprietary ways of connecting to the wireless router, I'm going to stick with the most straightforward way, which is common to all wireless routers, and that's the good old-fashioned Ethernet cable. So, to get started, you simply want to connect an Ethernet cable to one of your computers and the other end to your wireless router. Now, when connecting to the wireless router, you want to make sure you connect that cable to one of the LAN ports and not the WAN port. Now, if you watch my first video, you may be able to detect a small problem here. And the problem is this computer is on a different network from the wireless router. The wireless router comes with a configuration out of the box set to 192.168.1.1. And until now, your computer has been on the 192.168.0 network. Now this 0 and this 1 over here means that these two devices are on separate networks. So referring back to video 1 again, what we're going to do is we're going to use the magic of DHCP to fix this problem. We're simply going to make sure that our computer is set up to pick up DHCP addresses, reboot it, and when it comes back up, the wireless router will recognize that it's a new device and give it an IP address on its network. Which means we can open up a web browser and type in the wireless router's IP address or a web page to connect to it. It'll either be an IP address, something like this, or it'll be a website address like this. These little website addresses are specially configured to search for the wireless router and connect to it. Now, if you don't know what the IP address is, you might be able to find it on a plate on the bottom or the back of the router. And if you still can't find it, you can always Google default router passwords. Now, the site I like to use for this is called Mobi. It has a huge selection of wireless routers. Once you have all your stars aligned correctly, it's time to log in to the wireless router. The first thing you want to do when you connect to your wireless router is to change your admin password. Your admin password is the password you use to connect and configure your wireless router. This is not the same thing as your wireless passphrase, which you use to connect to the Wi-Fi. You'll normally find the place to do this under a section called Administration. Administration is typically considered an advanced function on most wireless routers. So let's go to Advanced, and then System Tools, and then Administration. Okay, so if the security of your home wireless network is important to you, you want to make sure you use a secure password. Okay, using your street address, your pet's name, or your phone number is not a secure password. Bill Johnson is not a secure password. So here's an example of a secure password. That is a good example of a secure password. So let's just go with this. Now, of course, you're thinking, well, this is going to be next to impossible to remember. That's why I recommend the use of a password program like LastPass to remember these things for you. So let's go ahead and put that password in here. Then confirm it. And then save it. And then try it out. Okay, now if you're using LastPass, this thing will pop up here, and you can click Update to add it to your list of passwords. And you should be good. Okay, the next step is getting our wireless router connected to the internet. A lot of times this will happen automatically, but still, you need to know these steps to make sure that everything went right. So before we start getting involved with getting the wireless router connected to the internet, the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the cable coming out of the modem provided by the internet service provider is plugged in to the WAN port, or in this case the ADSL port. Before you get started, you might want to click the on-off button to get the wireless router to restart and sync up with the internet service provider. If you're looking at the main screen of a wireless router that hasn't been configured yet, you're most likely going to feel your mouse being pulled towards a button that says something like Quick Setup. It will be almost impossible to resist, but I suggest you do anyway. These quick setup wizards make it easy to put a basic configuration on your wireless router. But the problem is it does most of what it does behind the scenes, and you can't really see what it's doing. Then later, when you want to make changes to your wireless router's configuration, you may not know what's what because you let the quick setup wizard do everything for you. Okay, so on this particular router, to get it connected to the internet, you click on Internet. And there is an auto detect in here that you can use, but just to help you understand a few of what these things are, most internet service providers are going to provide you with a dynamic IP address, meaning that it will configure itself to your wireless router automatically, and it will probably change periodically. Other types of settings are static IPs. Many businesses which own IP addresses on the internet will have to configure the router with a static IP address. PPOE, that is something that you use with DSL, and it usually involves a username and a password, which you'll have to get from your internet service provider. L2TP and PPTP, those are advanced configurations which are outside the scope of this video. Now, what these things mean: do not clone MAC address and clone computer MAC address. If you click on clone current computer MAC address, the wireless router will use the MAC address on your computer instead of its MAC address. The cool thing about this is if you use this feature, a lot of times you can get a different IP address from the internet service provider by using that. Okay, so let's go ahead and say auto detect. And it tells us something we already know, which is we're using a dynamic IP address. So you click Save. Now, if you click Network Map, it will tell you a few things about your network. One of them is that you are connected to the internet. Here's your wireless router. You've got 2 wired clients and 0 wireless clients. It will also tell you your internet status is connected. If you go to the Advanced tab on this wireless router, it'll give you all kinds of interesting statistics about your wireless connection and everything, including your MAC address, your IP address, etc., etc. This is a good place to go when you want to get a brief overview of what your wireless router is doing. Okay, your wireless passphrase is different from your administrator password. The administrator password is what you use to log on and configure the router. The wireless passphrase is what you use to connect to the Wi-Fi. I like to use the words passphrase and password to differentiate between the two. Okay, so once you get into the wireless passphrase section, the first thing you'll notice is everything is already set up for you. If you look at the plate on the bottom of the router or the little card that came with it, you'll see that all you have to do to log on to your Wi-Fi is use this SSID and this password. So that's great, right? Well, no, it's not great. You want to make sure you change these, because if somebody else gets a hold of your default Wi-Fi password, they can get in and do anything they want to with your network. Okay, so let's look at some of these other options. You have the choice of enabling or disabling your Wi-Fi on your network. You can disable one or both of them. You can hide the SSID. Now, what does that mean? That means that nobody can see your SSID from their device, but you can still connect to it by typing in the SSID manually. Some consider that a form of security. And yes, when you're configuring a Wi-Fi passphrase, you want to make it as secure as possible, meaning random letters and numbers. Yes, that is a pain, I understand, but the good thing is most devices will remember your passphrase once you type it in once. I don't think it's really necessary for me to demonstrate typing in all these SSIDs and passwords. I think you get the basic idea. Once everything is done, just click on Save and you should be good. If this is the first time you've ever watched any of my videos, you may be wondering, what the heck is DHCP? DHCP is not something you normally have to set up on a wireless router. But if you plan on doing a lot of configurations, it's a good thing to get out of the way initially. I go into great detail about DHCP in my first video. Basically, all DHCP is a pool of IP addresses that the wireless router uses to give out to wireless and wired devices connected to it. There's something called a DHCP reservation, which means certain devices with certain MAC addresses will automatically receive an IP address that you specify, which is a very handy configuration that we'll get into later. To set that all up, you want to have a DHCP scope well defined on your wireless router settings. On this wireless router, DHCP is considered an advanced setting, which you'll find under Network, and then DHCP Server. On this wireless router, the DHCP settings are fine the way they are. The same goes for many other wireless routers. This is one reason why many wireless routers just simply work out of the box. Still, if you're planning on doing some advanced configurations later on down the line, this is something that's good to get familiarized with. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at this. The way DHCP is set up on this right now is the IP address pool, which means the available IP addresses on this wireless router starts at 100 and ends at 249. So that's like 150 IP addresses that are available. Anything below 100 can be used for manually set static IP addresses and reserved IP addresses. If you scroll down here, you'll see the section for address reservations. To create an address reservation, the first thing you'll need is the MAC address from a device. So let's just grab this one here and click Add. So the MAC address is this, and we want to give it an IP address that's below 100. So let's just give it 192.168.0.25. Give it a name. So the name for that computer is Caesar. Click on this and click Save. Now we have a reservation. So what will happen is the next time that Caesar is rebooted, it will pick up this IP address. Now another interesting thing you can set up with DHCP reservations is you can specify the default gateway, you can specify the DNS server and the secondary DNS server, which are important because that's how a computer finds its way on the internet. Okay, now I don't want to leave this the way it is because this may mess up one of my computers. So you've seen how that works. So let's just get rid of this and save the configuration. The next thing we're going to discuss is QoS. QoS stands for Quality of Service. Your router uses QoS to give you the ability to prioritize certain types of traffic or specific devices over everyone else on the network in order to keep your favorite games and TV shows from lagging or being interrupted by someone else's activity on the network. There are different ways to implement QoS, depending on which manufacturer's router you got. Sometimes QoS is so simple a child can do it, and other times it's such a pain you wonder if it's even worth the bother. I would avoid the word traditional QoS and stick to either dynamic or adaptive QoS when shopping for a wireless router. So just to get it out of the way, I'm going to cover traditional QoS first. Just to illustrate how handy-dandy a password manager program such as LastPass can be, like I mentioned earlier, I'm actually using 3 different routers to do this video. I'm using the TP-Link, a Netgear, and an ASUS. Without a password manager program, I would absolutely lose my mind trying to remember these things. To demonstrate traditional QoS, I'll be using the ASUS router. So simply click on it, and bing bang boom, I'm in the router. So as an example of how painful traditional QoS can be, let's take a look at this ASUS router. On the ASUS, QoS is called Traffic Manager. And it's not enabled by default. If you want to use QoS, you basically just turn it on, and some more stuff appears down here, but it's still not on yet. until you click Apply. Okay, so let's go back to Traffic Manager and see what's going on. In order to prioritize my bandwidth, the wireless router needs to know how much bandwidth I have. And I get that by going to speedtest.net. And my download is 107, my upload is 10. So I'm just going to say 107 by 11. My upload is 11. And my download is 107. Click Apply. So the way traditional QoS works is you use manually configured user-defined rules. Okay, now this particular wireless router will have some pre-configured things in here that you can use right away, such as Windows Live, HTTPS, web surf, all that stuff is in here. And then they'll have some games. This list is kind of dated, but just to show you how this works, basically what you would do is you go, oh, okay, I want to play Diablo 3. Select that, and then you would pick the IP address or the MAC address of the machine on your network that you want to play it on. So you would say, okay, this one here. And then it automatically fills in the destination ports. Okay, so what this is saying is, on this computer, we're going to play Diablo 3, and we're going to open up these ports, and we're going to give that the highest priority. And then we simply add it, and then click Apply. To make sure your new rule has the highest priority, you can simply go in here and give these other protocols different priorities. So now what may be going on in the back of your mind is, hey, what if my game is not on this stupid list? It probably isn't. So then here comes the fun part. What you can do is you can go to this website called port4.com, and you can find just about every game out there. So you just keep on going until you find your game. And let's say we want to play Halo. Now in this case we have 374 TCP. So what we would do is we would go Halo TCP, pick our MAC address, and put the destination port for TCP in there. Add it, and then we would go Halo UDP, pick the destination computer, get our ports for UDP, put them in there, and add it. So now you've got Halo being allowed over these ports to this device. And of course you want to give them the highest priority. And since we like Halo better than we like Diablo 3, we just give that high. And that doesn't really matter because you're going to be playing everything off of this computer anyway. So there's a good example of traditional QoS. Not the kind of thing I would want to do every day. So now we're going to go to the opposite side of the spectrum and talk about dynamic QoS. To demonstrate dynamic QoS, I'm going to be using the Netgear router. To configure dynamic QoS on this router, we simply go to Dynamic QoS. Now, as usual, it's not enabled by default. So we basically have to just enable it. Once the router reboots, we're ready to configure QoS. Like other routers, this one wants to know what our bandwidth is. This particular router has a little utility to test our speed built in. Now the other two routers, we're actually using this router as their internet connection. So this one will probably be a little bit faster than the other ones because of that additional hop. Okay, if the router you're on offers the option to automatically update the performance database, I would go ahead and check that. Most wireless router manufacturers have an online database that the wireless router can use to sort out priorities of various devices and various protocols. And as I said, this is all done automatically for you. Yes, this is mostly automatic, but there are some little things that you can do, such as you can assign priorities to certain devices. For example, if you don't care too much about Dude's PC, you can simply edit its priority and give it, say, low. And give something that you actually care about, such as this NAS device, a high priority. So the way dynamic QoS works is it basically has a database of different types of protocols, different types of services, different types of devices, and it kind of just figures out which kinds of devices or which protocols need the highest priority. It kind of makes the decisions for you. It will automatically assign a video game priority over file transfers. That's basically it for dynamic QoS. So now let's talk about adaptive QoS. Like I said earlier, adaptive QoS kind of hits the sweet spot between the pain of traditional QoS and the absolute ease of dynamic QoS. With adaptive QoS, we can decide for ourselves what devices and what applications we want to give priority. But instead of having to look up port numbers and copy and paste things into an ugly interface, we get to use a simple drag and drop interface to easily select which protocols we want to have priority and which ones we don't want to have priority. QoS is one of those buzzwords that gets bounced around a lot by people who like to sound smart. The fact of the matter is QoS is not something you really need if you only have a few devices or a few people on your network at the same time. You really only need QoS if you have a lot of devices competing for network bandwidth and a few specific machines such as TVs and game consoles that need special attention. You can drive yourself crazy constantly tweaking your QoS settings, trying to get it just right, because the conditions on your network are always changing. And that magical sweet spot where everything is just perfect is constantly moving. So my basic rule of thumb when it comes to QoS is a great thing to have if you need it, but if you don't need it, don't pull your hair out over it. Okay, now let's talk about firmware. Firmware may seem like a boring topic on the surface, but it's probably one of the most important things you're going to want to familiarize yourself when you have a wireless router. I remember I once got a comment on one of my wireless router videos from someone who was asking me when I planned on updating the video with this year's models. I had to laugh a little bit, but I guess it's easy to assume that wireless router manufacturers are like automobile manufacturers and put out a new model every year. That's just not the case with wireless routers. It takes a lot of research and development to produce a new wireless router model. And it usually only happens when there's been significant changes in the technology. With the use of firmware updates, manufacturers can keep a router model new and relatively up to date for years without having to completely redo the design and hardware specs. A good example of this is several years ago I bought a router and I was very disappointed to find out that the router that I thought had VPN support didn't. I searched and searched through all the menus and there were no VPN settings anywhere. As it turned out, the latest firmware update included the VPN feature, so I updated the firmware and lo and behold, there was my VPN support. So that's why if you want your wireless router to be all it can be, you want to periodically check the status of the firmware on the manufacturer's website. Okay, let's go over to our Archer A9 wireless router. Okay, now on most wireless routers, updating firmware is considered an advanced activity. So you're going to want to go down here. And then on the TP link, it's under System Tools, Firmware Upgrade. Okay, now this particular wireless router makes it very convenient and easy to update the firmware. Okay, why? Because it gives you the firmware version you have currently. It gives you the latest version available. And if you look closely, you'll see we already have the latest version. It also gives you the version number of the hardware. Okay, that's very important. So if our wireless router does not have all these nice built-in convenience features, we would have to manually update the router, which means we would have to go here and make a note of what firmware version we're on, and we would also have to make a note of the hardware version of our wireless router. We would then take that information, go to the manufacturer's website for that wireless router, and go to firmware. Now, just as an aside, one of the reasons I like the Archer A9 so much is because the TP-Link website has this wealth of information. They've got all these video tutorials, they've got all this information. They even have emulators that you can use to test the wireless router's interface. Okay, so let's go to firmware. Okay, so we scroll down and we see all this information. Typically, you want to pay attention to whatever's in red. This is information that is going to keep you from damaging your router. So it's good to make note of it. Many times there will be several different versions of firmware to choose from. Typically, the one on top is the latest and greatest. So then from there, we would simply select download and show it in folder. Now you'll see here that this comes in the form of a zip file. That does not do us much good. If we want to upload this thing into our router, we want to extract this. So hopefully you have a utility on your computer called 7-zip. If not, it's a free download. Go here and say extract, and this will create a folder with everything you need. Now this long file name here ending in .bin, that means binary, that's what we're looking for. They even have instructions here on how to upgrade the router. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to make a note of where you have this, and in my case it's in the default downloads folder. So we will go back to our router, and once we know where to look, we simply browse for it on our computer. Okay, so now we drop that into our downloads folder. So let's just go here and then go into this folder, and this is what we're looking for right here. This .bin file, that's what we're looking for. So we click open, and then we would say upgrade. Now in this case, I'm not going to upgrade this because I already have the latest and greatest. Now of course, this particular router, we don't have to go through all that pain. We can just simply go check for upgrade, and it will tell you your firmware is up to date. If it wasn't, it would let you download it and install it. If you're doing a manual update, you want to be 100% sure that the firmware you're installing is the correct one for your router, because if you get it wrong, you can damage your router. In fact, you can not only damage your router, you can brick your router and make it totally useless. That's why it's always nice to have one of these handy dandy upgrade utilities built into your wireless router. Our final topic is something that's often overlooked but is still very important. It's called your configuration backup. Sometimes after adding multiple configurations to your router, things might start to get a little bit confusing and you may feel the urge to just blow everything away and start from scratch. In other cases, you may be getting some kind of a strange error that just doesn't go away no matter what you do. In both cases, the best way to handle this is to simply reset your router. This is done with the reset button on the back. It'll either be a little hole or it'll be a little button. Now on this router that I'm on now, you basically just hold down the button for 5 seconds while the router is on. The router will reboot to its default configuration. Of course, once you get to this point, you don't want to have to redo every single setting you've put on your wireless router since you've owned it. The whole point was just to get rid of the last few configurations. So what you can do is once you get your wireless router to a point where you like it, you can simply do a backup of that configuration into a file, save it, and then when you start playing around with resets and doing all kinds of things later, you can simply reset the router, upload that configuration backup back into your router, and you're back to where you were before you started screwing around. So let's go back to our TP-Link router. Okay, to back up our wireless router's configuration, we go to Advanced, scroll down to System Tools, and go Backup and Restore. So this is about as simple as it gets. Okay, you've got a nice little utility here. Backup, restore, factory default restore. You can actually go over here if you want to restore everything except for your cloud account and your login information, or you can just straight up restore it to factory defaults. You don't even have to use the button. So to back up our wireless router's configuration, we simply click on Backup, and the .bin file is automatically downloaded to our computer. We can then find that file location and we can leave it as it is. As you can see, it gives us a convenient name here, the router and the date, or if we wanted to, we could always rename it to something else. Then, if we want to restore that file, it's a simple matter of clicking on Browse, going back to that file's location, clicking Open, and then hitting Restore. Now, in this case, I don't need to do a restore, so I won't be clicking on Restore. So that's basically it. In a few seconds, you save yourself a lot of time and a lot of frustration. This is one of those things where you think you'll never need it until you do. Believe me, I've run into many instances when I was grateful that I took the time to save a backup copy of my wireless router configuration. That concludes this video on wireless router setup. I hope you got something out of it. If so, in my next video, we'll discuss several easy and inexpensive ways to improve your wireless performance.